So let's get into our Thursday conversation. It's Justice Thursdays, and we want to talk about importance of land rights and tenure rights in land restoration programs. We are joined by two people in the studio. Kader Baba is a country program manager, TMG Research Benin, and do you call it Benin?
Benin.
Okay. Washe Kazungu is research associate land governance. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation. Welcome to the Situation Room.
Okay.
That's the hot seat of the Situation Room. Kader, how does it feel? Warm?
Warm, but nice.
Very good. To welcome you to this conversation, CT has the day's proverb. This week's proverbs are from Congo, the Republic of Congo.
Just where you could have said Congo Brazzaville.
Congo Brazzaville.
The Congo. A truly interesting country. Most people do not know that actually. The country, upon independence, had a leftist leaning, what in those days were referred to as communist. But then what is strange about it is that if you look at a time in the history of that country when it actually began to change, was when the leadership was clearly leftist leaning. That's when school enrollment increased. Healthcare facilities and everything healthcare improved. Road networks improved. There was a lot that happened during that period. And if I'm to count rightly, the current president we have is probably the fifth president this country has had. They've had coups and counter coups. They've had bloodless coups. They've had elections. Let's say they've had a lot. But it's also a very rich country. That's the other thing. So the interest in the country is probably as great as the people of the country are. Enough said. Now the proverb. Two birds disputed about a kennel. Now, kennel, K-E-R-E-N-E-L, not colonel as in a rank in the military.
Kennel for dogs.
Yes, that one, where the house for dogs. Okay, no, not that one. When a third swooped down and carried it off.
Two birds disputed over
A kennel.
a kennel.
Yes.
And what is that kennel? You
Well-
told us what it's not. So what is it?
Take your pick.
Anything. Kennel with corn, maize, anything.
Anything. Okay, let's call it for purpose of our discussion, bitings.
It is.
A morsel.
Yes.
Cannabis.
Two birds.
While they were still having this to and fro, and third one came.
Another
Whoop.
came and swooped.
That's it. End of that story. You guys
Two
keep
birds
debating.
disputed over food. And another one came and swooped it away.
Yes.
What's your interpretation of this, Wash?
I think even related to the conversation we might have, I would interpret it this way. The two birds being the different actors in different issues, maybe for the sake of our conversation today, in environmental issues, two actors being the people and the governments, and the third bird being the external parties, so the people not in that country or the governments not in that country.
Okay.
People who would come and sweep away with whatever agenda that we are not agreeing on fast enough. That would be my interpretation.
Nice one. That's nice one. Kader, what's your interpretation of this?
I think it can be contextualized, but I will say that it's a call for unity, because anytime you start fighting each other, you always have a third party that gain from the fight.
To unite, lest it's taken over by somebody else.
Let me say what we normally say. The beauty of preferring your opinion is that you cannot be wrong. It is your opinion.
It's your opinion.
And it's your interpretation.
Bas.
And it is right. It is okay.
Bas.
Yes.
Introduce us to TMG Research, Kader. What is TMG Research?
Okay, thanks. TMG Research is a Berlin-based think tank working on sustainability issues. And we have 4 main programs right now. Land governance, urban food futures, food system transformations, and nature-based solutions. So we are working in different countries with different partners based on the specific programs we are running. the research we are leading is not like a purely scientific research, but we call it basically like a transdisciplinary research because we are co-construction with our partners and grassroots organizations. So that's a bit of TMG, and the main goal also trying to connect like the global level and the local level, building evidence from local and national level to inform global decision in the case of land governance, like UNCCD, land tenure decision.
Why? So, if we break it down into just land governance, which we want to discuss today, right?
Yes.
So, what do you do as TMG research, and how would it impact our land governance in Kenya, with our Kenyan laws and our Kenyan land ownership and tenure practices? You want to come in, Washe?
Yes. I think because now for Kenya specifically, I may know just a bit more than Kader, just a bit. But how it impacts our land governance, we have the land tenure decision specifically was a decision that was passed by parties to the United Nations Convention to combat desertification. This is purely an environmental convention, of course. But in 2019, the parties to the convention agreed that they should recognize land rights and tenure rights. And apply the principles of responsible land governance, even as they implement actions to combat desertification and land degradation. Yes. So your question was on how it would affect.
How does
Kenya's
it
land.
directly relate to
our land rights and so on? So at the global level, you have these decisions being made by parties. Countries come together and agree. At the national level, we have the Ministry of Environment, in most cases, as the custodian of these agreements, and they now have an obligation, I would say, to implement the decisions that we agree on. And the level of implementation varies from one country to another, but this decision was saying that even as we implement our environmental action, we need to consider how it affects the communities who need to access these lands for their food security and for their livelihood. I think that's a better way to explain it. Yeah.
How do we see this played out then? Because oftentimes you find that the decisions that are made, crafted on a global scale, and then sometimes we see the ratification of the same by, states.
Yeah.
How then do these if we look at the nitty-gritty and how they actually play out for land governance in Kenya? Of course, we've seen over the last couple of weeks that things have gone awry in terms of who owns what or who really doesn't own the other. So how does it play out to say that, yes, if we have this governance structure on a global scale, how then does it come within country and then play out for governance here, taking into consideration that there are local laws, there is legislation by which Kenya is bound within the boundaries of the country?
Maybe to answer that, I'll speak to a challenge that we, even in our work, we face a lot, and it's something my colleague Kader will mention about the meeting we had. But one challenge is, you see, when you talk of land, you talk of land rights. Most times at the national level, you would assume this is, and even when Eric was asking his question about land, he's referring to things at the Ministry of Lands, right? But these obligations are held at the Ministry of Environment. And this now means at the national level, we often have a disconnect sometimes, because the people at lands view, if you ask them about this decision, they likely will say, I think this is an environmental issue. Which is right. But then at some point we have to connect them. And I think another challenge is most times the Ministry of Lands prioritize administration of the land, but not necessarily these other issues. But the environment guys now focus on
land use.
Yes, land use, land management. Yeah.
Give an example of one of these obligations, or some of these obligations. That touch on the UNCCD agreements, but then now impact how we are using land in the country.
So for each country has what they call a land degradation neutrality target setting program, and in these programs they have set out their commitments to combat desertification, to achieve land degradation neutrality, right? in Kenya's.
I think let's begin with that. What is land degradation neutrality?
Degradation. Okay, so land degradation is, of course, land losing the quality or its productivity and so on. Land degradation neutrality would be a situation where we are halting degradation, we are reducing it, we are reversing, which means we are recovering degraded lands, right? Does that cover land
Yes, I
degradation?
think land degradation neutrality is like a state whereby, for example, you try to compensate all the degradation happening through specific action. So basically, there's three. I will say avoiding. That is the first thing. And second, that will be restoring, right? And the third one is reduce. No. First, avoid, reduce, and restore.
Yeah.
So these are like the hierarchy. But when you talk about a state, then you also mean behind some processes, because you will not avoid, you will not reduce, restore if they are not processes. So the issue that we have is sometimes when government commit, for example, if you consider Kenyan land degradation neutrality target setting program, or Benin or Malawi, is usually bold numbers, like ambitious targets, like we will restore 1 million hectare. We are committing to restore 400,000 hectare per year, and they have like similar commitment not only under UNCCD but also for UNCBD, like biodiversity or climate. But they are all reliant on land, and the same land where communities are already complaining of shrinking space. So you have like framework. Let's say at the international level, where organization providing some frames, but at the national level, states committing, but in the implementation, sometimes they forgot basic principles, and at the end, when they try to achieve the commitment, they also create sometimes a lot of frustration with the communities they are supposed to serve.
Something that I like to understand, what needs to happen to land for it to be considered degraded?
There are a lot. So that you.
What's degraded land? You say degradation.
Yes.
What is this thing that happens that brings about this degradation, so that we know when you look at land, you know this land has been degraded, but we also understand what it is that has happened to bring it to that stage?
So land degradation basically is, as Washe said, a state whereby land loses its quality, its functionality. For example, farmers will always tell you, like, each year the productivity, yield is decreasing. Like, these are some indication that land is getting degraded. So you may also have a state where visually you see like land is being eroded. This is land erosion. And in some cases where communities are not seeing the effect is the use of intensive fertilizer, for example, are broken the structure of the soil. It's not visible at the first hand, but with time we just realize that the structure is not the same anymore. Whatever you grow on it, you may have like to rely on more and more fertilizer to get something from it.
So the reference point here is land which in its natural state was either a forest, it was farmland, grassland.
Yeah.
And what was its natural form then is whittled away by whatever forces, and it becomes arid or semi-arid or even a desert.
Yes, that is the consequence, like the long-term consequence of,
So in essence, a desert can't be degraded.
No, in essence.
A desert. There's land we refer to as deserts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Some of it.
It's an optimal example of degraded land.
Yes.
It's already there.
I think you've gone to where, yes. Because optimal in the sense that you're asking the question, can the state of that land be changed? And actually it can, because we have countries like Israel, that are predominantly desert, predominantly or semi-arid.
Yes.
And we have seen what it is they've been able to do with that land. So
Yes.
that is evidence that you can actually turn this around.
But I think in Kader, in his description, he mentioned reverse. That's the part, that bit, reversing degradation, which means working to recover what has already been degraded and getting it back to productivity or to a beneficial state.
Yes.
My inclination whenever we talk about restoration is prevention.
Okay.
No,
Please go ahead.
no, I just want to mention like a degraded land does not mean immediately something like sterile.
Stereotype.
That mean like it does not mean that it's like
Infertile.
dead. It cannot be reclaimed anymore because you also talk sometimes of land reclamation. So even like land that you perceive as desert, with specific action it will come, but it has like huge cost. And this huge cost is usually it's not all countries that could invest and in the desert, for example, and have some greens. So yeah.
So back to in the country like Kenya, where we have a vast majority of our land is arid and semi-arid. What are these commitments that we've made? What have we said? That we're going to convert our semi-arid lands into green lands?
Yeah, we've not. I think we've committed 5.1 million hectares, and one of the
5.1
million hectares.
hectares.
Yes.
To do what?
To be put under forestry.
Currently not forested. Is it 5.1 million new hectares of forests, or to
That is yes, that's the target. So we have commitments under, and I should mention we have commitments under several agreements and such. We have the Bond Challenge, we have the AFR 100, and then we have these commitments under the LDN Target Setting Program. All of these commitments, one of them is the one I mentioned on 5.1 million hectares. Another is on halting all conversion from forests to other land uses. And then it was, there's another commitment on rehabilitating mine areas and so on. But I should mention, our most countries, the priority has been on reforestation and protecting the existing forests.
Okay. Because I was going to ask, this land, this, what you say,
5.1 million.
5.1 million
Hectares.
hectares.
Yes.
What is it? Is it land that's laying fallow? What is happening with that land currently that we will now say, let's put it towards the purposes of?
Actually,
it's not even
forestation.
Forestation. It's not reforestation.
Yes.
It's just forestation.
that actually brings us to the one of the conversations that Kader was leading to, that even as countries are making commitments, we are making commitments, but we're not acknowledging that the land is already being used for something. I don't think, as a Kenyan, I don't think there's any idle land. There's no idle land. Even what sometimes we perceive as idle land is pasture. It's pastoralist land, and there's an owner to the land. I've worked in Marsabit County, and I was reminded, any land you see, there's an owner to it. Do not assume that this is free land. So there's no free land anywhere. It's currently being used. If you want to convert any of these lands for conservation purposes, it means you're working on a land use. And land use change. And this land use change will obviously impact some communities. And now in Africa in particular, we need to also remember that these lands, the communities relying on these lands are relying on them for their livelihood. It's not just people doing commercial work, it's actually their household food security, their income, their livelihood. So we cannot then solve our environmental problems, but then create new problems for the people.
So currently the land is not just laying there, that they're actually folks. And so that's maybe where the compensation that Kader spoke of, is that where that comes in? Because if there's land and we say it's been earmarked for forestation, it is currentally being used by people in the country. But if you're giving a commitment that we will forest our land, then why it will become so expensive is that you have to compensate communities, families, for land that they would use for, small-time agriculture, things like this, in order to contribute to the national index when it comes to making up for this land.
Yes.
Do the two balance out? Is that okay?
That's the ideal situation, but in reality, it's not happening this way. So usually you have like state-owned land, you have communal land, maybe you have some private land. And when large restoration programs come, or mining or plantations, so commitment, because the power is with the state, the negotiation process that should go between the government and the population, like the communities living on those lands. Sometimes people talk about having like a free, prior and informed consent before having the land that communities are using. This is not respected. The negotiation process are not engaged with the communities. So it's just a power relationship position where state try to engage activities at the expense of local communities. And that is where we are saying it's really important. And this is not only TMG saying it. It's like one of even the second principle of land degradation neutrality, saying if we are engaging to restore land, it's also key to respect communities' land rights and ensure the restoration program is not conflicting with their livelihood needs. But usually we just forget some principle and we
just go and
engage
say
in
we need
large-scale
forests.
plantation and
Set
so
a target.
We want trees. Do you have specific examples? Washe, you've told us you've worked, for example, in Marsabit and other parts of the... Do you have specific examples where you've seen that divergence coming in, where the government is pushing ahead with one program, but then the community is sort of feeling that they were not consulted or they're getting disadvantaged?
In land restoration specifically, or in general?
Well,
I think we have so many examples.
In only land. Let's focus on land.
So for land restoration, how I would explain it is, for Kenya, the actual decision of the UNCCD talks about land rights and tenure rights. So when we talk of tenure rights, we're not referring necessarily about ownership of the land, but we are referring to access to use, to use some resources, to access some resources, and also to contribute to the management, to participate in managing this resource. For Kenya specifically, this is from the findings of our research. According to the laws, we're in a good place. There's some recognition of tenure rights because we have community forest associations and they have user groups which allow them to use resources. We have, through their community forest associations, again, there is some recognition and contribution to the management of each forest station at the local level. So we have some of what we would consider recognition of tenure rights. But the management of our forests is often, of most of things, it's top down. It's from national government to communities. So I wouldn't say there's a way where these communities inform what happens at the top.
should they not?
They should. Of course.
But
they
then,
should.
no,
Then
no,
we have
no,
to have
no.
a framework for that.
Washe,
Yes.
in many of these areas, in those vast areas where we have community land, land is basically owned by the community,
Yes.
right? Managed by the county in trust and the National Land Commission. These communities are involved. They're the ones that come together and they say, all right, so we have this large grazing lands. We are going to get involved in restoring this land, in making sure that we don't cut the trees, in planting trees. They're involved, aren't they?
Which one are you referring to? We go to the example of Marsabit County.
We can use any of these examples in all these community lands.
So
We're
a
talking
lot
about
of our community lands,
the Range Lands Trust, for example. Range Lands Trust.
Yes.
a lot of our community lands in Kenya are not registered though. They are not registered. And we do have a law on community land registration. It's called the Community Land Act of 2016. But if these lands are not registered, and the law sets out the procedure of course, engaging communities, what institutions they're supposed to set up, how these institutions are supposed to contribute to decision making. But without these institutions, then there is no way to tell someone they did not sufficiently involve a community. So, for example, in a Community Land Act, we say that for the major decisions on communally owned land, like say selling some of the land or separating it for another use, you want 2/3 from the community assembly. So
A supermajority.
yes, but this can only happen for a community that is registered. If a
Yeah.
community is not registered, why would, say, another party who is not the community have to go through this process? They will say, we met with some of your elders and so on, but then this will not meet some of the requirements which you would refer to when you're talking of sufficient inclusion, participation, and so on.
So, I'm interested where you talk. A lot of community land has not been registered. Community land, if you look at it, can community land and ancestral land be used interchangeably? So land that was handed down from generations. A lot of it not having been documented with registration to say, all right. And here we are saying that if you paint a picture of the ideal situation, that there should be some kind of compensation from government to community. And if that's the way going forward in terms of recommendation, then wouldn't the first cog be then to ensure then that community land is actually registered and documented?
I'd be very happy if that happens. Yes, I think documentation of community lands would really help as we make these commitments. In fact, it would help us be clear on our commitments when we know, okay, this is the acreage of all community lands in Kenya. If we decide that we want to meet our restoration targets by also engaging communities and having them do restoration on their lands, then this would be in a better position to make this decision. Yeah. Kader?
Yes, I think it's also into a little bit on this question of formalization versus legitimate tenure rights, for example. So usually when we proceed with registration, then we are formalizing. But we also have a lot of countries where right now, if we want to stick on formalization, then you create a lot of restriction whereby communities have legitimate tenure right, but the rights are not formalized. If you take like a lot of pastoralists who are, as you said, like from customary background, they are on the land for generation and generations. And for example, one day or another, for wildlife protection or for forest purpose, a large part of this land is taken like without any negotiation.
Documentation.
So the legitimate rights are somehow violated, and this is the way, unfortunately, most of our protected areas have been constructed. So, and even today, in a lot of countries, including Benin or Madagascar, where I'm also working, you have adjacent communities who are denied some basic rights because we want to protect land, the forest. I still remember one of women I met in Madagascar who is telling me at the end it's like the survival of Lemurian, like this kind of monkey which is
the Lemurian.
Lemurian.
Yeah.
It seems like the life of Lemurians is worth than my life and the life of my children. So this kind of conflict, as much as we understand the need to protect biodiversity, doing it at the expense of communities who have been living around for generations and who have been, in fact, protecting also the forest and all those species their way, is a bit problematic.
In some areas where we have an ongoing matter that is yet to be settled, a community that has even gone all the way to the East African Court of Justice and said, look, we occupy this land, it's our ancestral land. The government has said, this is forest, get out. And you need to be compensated. So in such cases, what kind of conversation should be happening? Is it allowing such people to continue using and accessing and living within forests? Or is it identifying a separate piece of land and telling them, your new ancestral land from this day shall be this one?
I will take one example. So in Benin, for example, you have gazetted forests. And around the gazetted forest, you have a lot of communities living in. But those forests have what we call a participatory forest management plan. So on document, well written, where it's clearly indicated the kind of activities communities can do, like to meet the livelihood need and also contribute to protect the forest. But on implementation, it's rather top-down, where conservation is just like, forest.
It's a straitjacket issue. It's only
exactly. And we are always telling them it does not matter how strong your policies are if you are not able to connect conservation priorities with livelihood needs. We will always have a situation where our forests will be degrading all the time, despite like huge investment we are putting in. And that is like, look at a lot of forest projects since, 30 years, and always top down, creating more and more frustration between the communities and forest officers. But at the end, the statistics are showing that it's always degrading. So having a human right perspective, taking into account livelihood need and opening the conversation, frankly, it's maybe the basis to move ahead. And
to whom should it be opened? And I think that's what we continue saying, because obviously there's government, and that's policy level where some of these things are being done. It's also government because, it's officials who are having these conversations. I mean, just look at the global climate conversation that's happening currently. And we're talking about lands, whether they be for climate purposes or whether it just be for anything else that government wants to do. And I think it's very important, the understanding, it needs to be clear-cut across board. But then who should be involved in these conversations? Is policymakers and government enough? And should it be, like you say, they've come and said, this is forest land, move. It doesn't matter. Community, ancestral, whatever, it doesn't matter. Can it just be crass like that? Or should we say that communities with a fundamental and efficient understanding of why governments would need these lands, after they do understand, then it is all right to move forward beyond that? Should the push be for more conversations with the communities who have lived on these lands for generations to have a basic understanding of why government would want to use it? And then in as much as you're being compensated, you know why this is happening.
I think you've described free, prior and informed consent. Which is, that's what you've described, right? Which is a principle of responsible land governance, and it's something that we talk about in land governance spaces, that you should engage a community and they should freely give their consent. They should be informed as they give their consent. They should know why they're giving up this land and so on. And also back to what Kader mentioned about participatory forest management plans. This would be a good entry point to have those conversations and then ensure livelihood needs are still secured and our goals, even the communities can understand why we are. Because the communities might be affected by climate change and all these issues, but they were not there when we were having our discussions and saying we're committing land, we're saying we will do all of these nice things. They're not there. And then we need to connect the two. They need to understand that commitments are being made and why these commitments are being made and how they will benefit them also, not just the country.
How is it that this conversation seems to have a divergence where we're talking about the interests of the government, and yet the government is the people? In this country, the principle here, the people, it's not the government. The monarchy, the person is the principle. So now you are arriving at an agreement without the principle. How does this work really? We understand that there's something that is entrenched in our constitution. It's called public participation.
Yes.
Okay? Yeah. How do you arrive at agreements and then go to public participation? I thought you public participate first. Then you go to those agreements.
Yes. I think these are some dysfunctionalities we are observing at the practical level. As when, for example, the state makes some commitment under land degradation neutrality target setting program like saying, for example, we want to restore 1,500,000 hectares. But on the ground, it needs some consultation. I'm talking from Benin because I'm not understanding clearly like the counties, the governor.
Yes.
So in Benin, for example, you have the state, you have the department, then you have like the communes, like municipalities and village. The point is, the mayors sometimes even don't know what the country commit under the LDN. So, for example, in Benin, we said, okay, now the government commit to this. Let's go and talk with the municipalities and see and try to define what we call national targets. Then we realize people are even not informed of what is LDN, what is land degradation neutrality. So this workshop becomes a kind of capacity building workshop instead of trying to define, okay, now at the practical level what we can do. And the same, like when sometimes the municipalities commit, they are not necessarily talking with people living at the hamlet or village level. So it's kind of a top-down again,
disjointed,
instead of going from bottom to the top.
Yeah, and
But definitely it's really important that the conversation start from the ground. It's difficult, it's heavy, sometimes it needs time, it needs a lot of resources. My opinion is that we have been always talking about participation, but usually it's instrumentalized to get funding. When it comes on the ground to implement what is participation, it's not. In fact, we are just counting some statistics, people coming to the workshop, but this is not participation.
It's too much work. And it's too technical. I mean, so imagine you're starting a conversation at a community level, all right? So, there is something called land degradation neutrality, and we want to make sure we don't cut trees here, and so we are going to commit with other countries in the world. It's so many conversations need to happen at that level. By the time you're going to go commit. Your people can understand when you come and break it down to them later as you implement. After all, you're not talking about capturing people's land.
Oh, yes, you are.
You're only talking about reclaiming
Oh, yes,
land.
you are. Oh, yes,
And you
are.
have to involve them.
You are. In a country...
My argument, CT,
Yes.
is that it's the laziness of the implementer to actually come and do the job. Because they can go and sign and then come and make sure that you are involving the people and you're engaging with them. Nobody will say that, no, we do not want trees here.
No. My fear is this. We are in Kenya. Things have been signed on our behalf, and the stories we've been told about these things are never quite what has been signed on our behalf. So, when it comes to something as simple as trees, you see, my thinking is, what you're saying is absolutely sound. Are we saying that communities cannot understand the need for preserving their land?
They understand.
They understood crop rotation long before the word was invented in English.
exactly.
That was keeping the land restored. They something they knew and understood.
In fact, the policy was adopted from their practice.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So this thing about trees, climate change didn't get us to understand planting trees. We had trees before. That's why we have forest cover. Everything is being made to sound like it's so complicated that if people were told about it,
They would reject it.
No, they wouldn't. If you understood how it is, you can present this very same thing in a way that they would understand, and because there are benefits at the end of it. That's why this discussion is being had. But if you talk land, and you talk government coming into land, and the explanation was not given before, I immediately think my land is being taken. It doesn't matter what you tell me thereafter. I will not believe. And after I've grown the trees, who will own the trees? And the government own the trees. And then, so I will not have a say. We have communities in this country whose land was in forests. They've been fighting these battles for the longest possible times. Because you know why? The government decided, this land also, you guys move here. Government decided. It was their land. And after moving here, this is what we're going to do with the forest. Lo and behold, that forest was felled. It also became land. People started living there.
Yes.
So they're saying, well, you removed us because you're conserving a forest, and this is what has happened. And here is where we are. Unfortunately, land issues, unless an honest discussion is what precedes everything that we are saying, even the benefits that are likely to accrue will not see the light of day.
I think you see, like the freedom of speech, the freedom to decide on what is good, what is not good, what we want, what we do not want. This is what we call democracy, right? And we praise it, we like it. But if the state, for example, consider doing this and this is important for everyone and just decide to do it without consulting people, then it's not democracy anymore. I'm always taking the example of like the city where I'm living in Germany. Well, wanted to build like a bridge across a river, but it took 2 years to discuss with people who are those who want this bridge, who are those who refuse, and for what reason. 2 years to discuss, only to construct this bridge, which potentially will be used by everyone.
But the bridge was built.
At the end, the bridge was built, but it went like through 2 years consultation, discussion with communities. So in land restoration, as much as the state or the population understand the importance of trees, the importance of this and this and this, if you do not consult them, it may inadvertently works against them. So the case of pastoralists is severe. In Niger, for example, a lady who was in our workshop said, by law since 1961, there are a clear delineation of agricultural land and pastoralist land. But after some years, agricultural land was degraded, then they start moving to what is pastoralist land. And with time, the government say, okay, those areas that have been degraded, we will restore for you, and after 5 years, you take it back.
You move back.
But then when they say, nice idea, open. But when the state restore, it never got open again. So it's like finally, they lose this area where they were grazing. So, it was a good idea to restore, but at the end, it does not work for the pastoralist communities. So these are some examples why it's really important to
in government. They just refused to return the land, and there was an agreement. You see, there was an agreement.
Yes.
Anyway, we've come to the end of the hour. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Kader Baba is the country program manager, TMG Research Benin, and Washe Kazungu is research associate on land governance. We've been talking about the importance of land rights and land tenure rights in land restoration programs. Asanteni sana for joining us.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.